What's up, everybody? This is a piece by Max Shachtman. It's titled "Hitler and Stalin Invade Poland." It's from Socialist Appeal from September 1939, and just as a warning, this is an abridged version. So, Section 1, 5th of September 1939, the Hitler-Stalin Pact is the most sensational news to come out of Moscow in many years. Up to yesterday, it was the general belief that Stalin was moving heaven and earth in an earnest attempt to establish a, quote, peace front of the, quote, democracies against the, quote, fascist aggressors, end quote, especially against fascist Germany. The friends and supporters of the Stalin regime said that repeatedly, and in so many plain words. Suddenly, right in the midst of the Anglo-French, Russian, and military discussions in Moscow, came the news that Hitler and Stalin had made a very important trade agreement. Then came the news that a, quote, non-aggression, end quote, pact had been negotiated between the two countries. 48 hours later, the Nazi Minister of Foreign Affairs and author of the Anti-Comintern Pact had flown to Moscow, where he was greeted with swastika flags, and the pact was promptly signed. I'm going to read the Wikipedia real quick on the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, officially the Treaty of Non-Aggression between Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was a non-aggression pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union with a secret protocol that partitioned between them the sovereign states of Central and Eastern Europe, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and Romania. The pact was signed in Moscow on the 23rd of August 1939 by German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop and Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov. Unofficially, it has been referred to as the Hitler-Stalin Pact and the Nazi-Soviet Pact. The treaty was the culmination of negotiations for an economic agreement between the USSR and Nazi Germany, which the Soviets used to obtain a political agreement. See Nazi-Soviet economic relations, 1934 to 1941. In the 1938 to 39 deal discussions. On the 22nd of August, Ribbentrop flew to Moscow to finalize the treaty which the Soviets had sought before with Britain and France. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed the next day, guaranteed peace between the parties and was a commitment neither government would aid or ally itself with an enemy of the other. In addition to the publicly announced stipulations of non-aggression. Come on, what's going on here? The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed the next day, guaranteed peace between the parties and was a commitment neither government would aid or ally itself with an enemy of the other. In addition to the publicly announced stipulations of non-aggression for the next 10 years, the treaty included the secret protocol which defined the borders of Soviet and German spheres of influence across Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Finland. The secret protocol also recognized the interest of Lithuania in the Vilnius region, and Germany declared its complete uninterest in Bessarabia. In the West, rumored existence of the secret protocol was proven only when it was made public during the Nuremberg trials. Soon after the pact, the Nuremberg trials after World War II. Soon after the pact, Germany invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin ordered the Soviet invasion of Poland on the 17th of September. One day after, a Soviet-Japanese ceasefire came into effect after the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, and one day after the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union approved the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. After the invasions, the new border between the two countries was confirmed by the supplementary protocol of the German-Soviet Frontier Treaty. In March 1940, parts of the Karelia and Sala regions in Finland were annexed by the Soviet Union following the Winter War. The Soviet annexation of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and parts of Romania, Bessarabia, North Bukovina, and the Herzegovina region followed. The Soviets used concern for ethnic Ukrainians and Belarusians as a pretext for the invasion of Poland. Stalin's invasion of Bukovina in 1940 violated the pact since it went beyond the Soviet sphere of influence that had been agreed with the Axis. The territories of Poland annexed by the Soviet Union following the 1939 Soviet invasion east of the Curzon Line remained in the Soviet Union after the war, and are now in Ukraine and Belarus. Vilnius was given to Lithuania. Only Podlasky was a small part of Galicia east of the San River, around Przemysl, Przemys with an accent L, were returned to Poland. Of all the other territories annexed by the Soviet Union in 1939 to 1940, those detached from Finland, Western Karelia, Petsamo, Estonia-Ingria, and Petseri country, and Latvia, Abrana, remained part of Russia, the successor state to the Russian SFSR, and the Soviet Union after the collapse of the USSR in 1991. The territories annexed from Romania were also integrated into the Soviet Union, such as the Moldavian SSR or Oblasts of the Ukrainian SSR. The core of Bessarabia now forms Moldova, northern Bessarabia, northern Bukovina, and the Herzegovina region, now from the Chernivtsi Oblast of Ukraine. Southern Bessarabia is part of the Odessa Oblast, which is also now in Ukraine. The pact was terminated on the 22nd of June 1941 when Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded the Soviet Union in pursuit of the ideological goal of Lebensraum. The Anglo-Soviet agreement succeeded. After the war, Ribbentrop was convicted of war crimes at the Nuremberg trials and executed. Molotov died in 1986. The text also referenced the Minister of Foreign Affairs and author of the Anti-Comintern Pact. I don't know what the Anti-Comintern Pact is. Wikipedia says, the Anti-Comintern Pact, officially the agreement against the Communist International, was an anti-communist pact concluded between Nazi Germany and the Empire of Japan on the 25th of November 1936 and was directed against the Communist International, Comintern. It was signed by German Ambassador at Large Joachim von Ribbentrop and Japanese Ambassador to Germany Kintomo Mushanakoji. Italy joined in 1937, but it was legally recognized as an original signatory by the terms of its entry. Spain and Hungary joined in 1939. Other countries joined during World War II. The Japanese signatories had hoped that the Anti-Comintern Pact would effectively be an alliance against the Soviet Union, which is certainly how the Soviets perceived it. There was also a secret additional protocol which specified a joint German-Japanese policy specifically aimed against the Soviet Union. However, after the accession of Fascist Italy to the pact, and especially the German-Soviet rapprochement after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it gained an increasingly anti-Western and anti-British identity as well. After August 1939, Japan distanced itself from Germany as a result of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The Anti-Comintern Pact was followed by the September 1940 Tripartite Pact, which identified the United States as the primary threat rather than the Soviet Union. However, by December 1941, this too was virtually inoperative. The Anti-Comintern Pact was subsequently renewed in November 1941 and saw the entry of several new members into the pact. The Nazi regime saw signing the Anti-Comintern Pact as a, quote, litmus test of loyalty, end quote. The Anti-Comintern Pact ceased to exist with the end of World War II. And finally, the Minister of War, or the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Germany, was Joachim von Ribbentrop. Erlich Friedrich Wilhelm Joachim von Ribbentrop lived from 1893 to 1946 and was a German politician and diplomat who served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nazi Germany. from 1938 to 1945. Ribbentrop first came to Adolf Hitler's notice as a well-traveled businessman with more knowledge of the outside world than most senior Nazis and as a perceived authority on foreign affairs. He offered his house Schloss Fuschel for the secret meetings in January 1933 that resulted in Hitler's appointment as Chancellor of Germany. Ribbentrop became a close confidant of Hitler to the disgust of some party members who thought him superficial and lacking in talent. Ribbentrop was appointed ambassador to the Court of St. James's, the royal court of the United Kingdom, in 1936, and then foreign minister of Germany in February 1938. Before World War II, excuse me, I have COVID if I didn't say that at the beginning of the video, so it's going to be a rough reading of hacking and wheezing. Ribbentrop played a key role in brokering the Pact of Steel in alliance with Fascist Italy and the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. He favored retaining good relations with the Soviets, opposing the invasion of the Soviet Union. In late 1941, due to American aid to Britain and the increasingly frequent, quote, incidents, end quote, in the North Atlantic between U-boats and American warships guarding convoys to Britain, Ribbentrop worked for the failure of the Japanese-American talks in Washington and for Japan to attack the United States. Ribbentrop did his utmost to support a declaration of war on the United States after the attack on Pearl Harbor. From 1941 onwards, Ribbentrop's influence declined. Arrested in June 1945, Joachim von Ribbentrop was convicted and sentenced to death at the Nuremberg trials for his role in starting World War II in Europe and enabling the Holocaust. On the 16th of October 1946, Joachim von Ribbentrop became the first of the Nuremberg defendants to be executed by hanging. And Vyacheslav Molotov, according to Wikipedia, lived from 1890 to 1986 and was a Soviet politician, diplomat, and revolutionary. He was a leading figure in the government of the Soviet Union from the 1920s to the 1950s as one of Joseph Stalin's closest allies. Molotov served as the chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, head of government, from 1930 to 1941 and as Minister of Foreign Affairs from 1939 to 1949 during the era of the Second World War and again from 1953 to 1956. An old Bolshevik, Molotov joined the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party in 1906 and was arrested and internally exiled twice before the October Revolution of 1917. Molotov briefly headed the party's secretariat before supporting Stalin's rise to power in the 1920s, becoming one of his closest associates. Molotov was made a full member of the Politburo in 1926 and became premier in 1930, overseeing Stalin's agricultural collectivization and resulting famine and his Great Purge. As foreign minister from 1939, Molotov signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact with Nazi Germany and during the Second World War was deputy chairman of the State Defense Committee and Stalin's main negotiator with the Allies. After the war, he began to lose favor, losing his ministership in 1948 before being criticized by Stalin at the 19th Party Congress in 1952. Molotov was reappointed foreign minister after Stalin's death in 1953, but Molotov's staunch opposition to leader Nikita Khrushchev's de-Stalinization policy led Molotov to join a failed coup against Khrushchev in 1957, after which he was dismissed from all of his positions. Molotov was sent to Mongolia as an ambassador before being expelled from the party in 1961. Molotov continued to defend Stalin's legacy until his own death in 1986. So, thank you for listening to all of these little introductions, but like I said, I'm not an expert on this period of history and need a refresher. And hopefully people get something out of that. Anyway, back to the text. The newspapers which reported that the pact had, quote, staggered, end quote, and, quote, stunned, and, quote, stupefied. Most of the world did not exaggerate in the least. Most bewildered and shocked of all were the members and sympathizers of the Communist Party. whom the news hit over the head like a metal-studded club. One organization, however, was not caught off guard and shocked by the news of the Stalin-Nazi pact. It's actually one word, Stalin-Nazi pact. The Socialist Workers Party, and the Fourth International, with which the Socialist Workers Party is affiliated, the so-called Trotskyist movement. This is simply a matter of fact, and it is not stated in a boastful vein. Our movement foresaw the alliance and predicted it as early as a year ago. In the Socialist Appeal of October 8, 1938, Leon Trotsky wrote, quote, "We may now expect, with certainty, Soviet diplomacy to attempt rapprochement with Hitler at the cost of new retreats and capitulations, which in their turn can only bring nearer the collapse of the Stalinist oligarchy." End quote. In the same paper of March 17, 1939, the present writer said, quote, "The democratic front on which all Stalinist policy hinged, the, quote, united front of the democracies against the fascist aggressors and warmongers," end quote, Stalin has dropped overboard without a splash. In its place is something so, quote, new, that it must have had a stunning effect upon the Stalinist parrots all over the world. Stalin holds out the olive branch to the fascist powers, to Germany primarily, end quote. They denounced as slanderers the Trotskyists, or anybody who even hinted a year, or a month, or as little as 2 weeks ago, that Stalin and Hitler would come to terms. Quote, "It is a great contribution to the cause of world peace," end quote. US Communist Party leader Earl Browder says now, "It helps the cause of democracy in the Democratic Front. It helps Poland." What happened directly after the Hitler-Stalin Pact? Not only vast expansion of the armed forces of all governments, but mobilization of troops and marching orders on a scale unknown since the World War broke out in 1914. The Moscow-Berlin Pact is exactly the opposite of a contribution to the cause of peace. In exchange for a Hitlerite promise not to attack the Soviet Union, Stalin has given Hitler a free hand in Poland. Poland has been ruthlessly sacrificed to the brutal imperialistic ambitions of Nazi Germany in the hope of saving the hides of the Kremlin autocrats. There cannot be the slightest doubt on this score. Why was the pact signed just at this moment? Just when Hitler has declared in the most insolent manner that he demands the absorption of Poland into Nazism, just when France and England threaten to take armed action against Germany. A non-aggression pact between Germany and the Soviet Union has been in existence for 13 years. Signed in 1926 by Foreign Minister Gustav Stresemann and Soviet Ambassador Nikolai Krestinsky. So, Gustav Stresemann lived from 1876 to 1929 and was a German statesman who served as Chancellor of Germany from August to November 1923 and as Foreign Minister from 1923 to 1929. Gustav Stresemann's most notable achievement was the reconciliation between Germany and France, for which Gustav Stresemann and French Prime Minister Aristide Briand received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1926. During a period of political instability and fragile, short-lived governments, Stresemann was the most influential politician in most of the Weimar Republic's existence. Gustav Stresemann attended the University of Berlin and Leipzig University, where Gustav Stresemann studied political economy, history, and international law, and developed Gustav Stresemann's vision of liberalism and nationalism, a combination of views that would define Gustav Stresemann's political career. After obtaining his doctorate, Gustav Stresemann worked in trade associations before entering politics. In 1907, Gustav Stresemann was elected to the Reichstag as a deputy of the National Liberal Party. Gustav Stresemann lost his seat in 1912 but was re-elected 2 years later. During the First World War, Gustav Stresemann was a vocal advocate for German militarism and expansionism. Exempted from war service due to poor health, Gustav Stresemann gradually became the National Liberals' de facto leader before formally taking over the party in 1917. Germany's defeat in the fall of the Hohenzollern monarchy came as a significant shock to Stresemann, forcing Gustav Stresemann to gradually reassess his previous position. Gustav Stresemann founded the German People's Party, DVP, and despite his own monarchist beliefs, came to grudgingly accept Weimar democracy and became open to working with the center and the left. In August 1923, Gustav Stresemann was named Chancellor and Foreign Minister of a Grand Coalition government. During Gustav Stresemann's brief chancellorship, Gustav Stresemann abandoned the policy of passive resistance against the French-Belgian occupation of the Ruhr and introduced the Rentenmark in a relatively successful attempt to tame hyperinflation in the country. In November, Gustav Stresemann's reshuffled government collapsed after the Social Democrats withdrew from the coalition. Gustav Stresemann resigned as chancellor following a vote of no confidence, but remained as foreign minister in the new government by Wilhelm Marx. Gustav Stresemann's first major diplomatic success was the 1924 Dawes Plan, which reduced Germany's overall reparations commitment. It was followed by the Locarno Treaties in 1925, which confirmed Germany's post-war western borders, guaranteed peace with France, and provided for Germany's admission to the League of Nations a year later. Gustav Stresemann also moved to improve relations with the Soviet Union through the 1926 Treaty of Berlin. In 1928, Gustav Stresemann oversaw Germany's participation in the Kellogg-Briand Pact, in which signatory states promised no use of war to resolve international conflicts. Amid failing health... What is going on with Wikipedia today? Amid his failing health, Stresemann successfully negotiated the Young Plan, which sought to further reduce German reparations payments. Gustav Stresemann died in October 1929 after a series of strokes at the age of 51. Nikolai Krestinsky lived from 1883 to 1938 and was a Soviet Bolshevik revolutionary and politician who served as the responsible secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Born in Mogilev to a Ukrainian family, Krestinsky studied law at St. Petersburg Imperial University, where Krestinsky embraced revolutionary politics. Krestinsky became a member of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, RSDLP, in 1903. 2 years later, he supported Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik faction following the RSDLP split. Repeatedly arrested, Krestinsky was exiled to the Urals in 1914, shortly before the outbreak of the First World War. After the 1917 February Revolution brought an end to the monarchy, Krestinsky led the Bolsheviks in Yekaterinburg before returning to Petrograd. Krestinsky was named People's Commissar for Finance and elected to the first Politburo. After the death of Yakov Sverdlov, Krestinsky also served as responsible secretary of the Russian Communist Party. Krestinsky was an ally of Leon Trotsky and supported the left opposition. With the rise of Joseph Stalin, Krestinsky gradually fell from power and lost his position in the government, save for his post as Soviet ambassador to Germany. Krestinsky eventually repudiated his opposition and capitulated to Stalin. Nikolai Krestinsky was arrested in 1937 in the Great Purge and charged with treason. He was found guilty in the 1938 trial of the 21 and executed. And the treaty being referred to is the Treaty of Berlin of 1926. The Treaty of Berlin, German-Soviet Neutrality and Non-Aggression Pact, was a treaty signed on the 24th of April 1926 under which Germany and the Soviet Union pledged neutrality in the event of an attack on the other by a third party for 5 years. The treaty affirmed the German-Soviet Treaty of Rapallo of 1922. Ratifications for the treaty were exchanged in Berlin on the 29th of June 1926 and went into effect on the same day. The treaty was registered in League of Nations Treaty Series on the 3rd of August 1926. It was renewed by additional protocols signed on the 24th of June 1931, ratified on the 5th of May 1933. The additional protocol was registered in League of Nations Treaty Series on the 15th of February 1935. So, back to the text. A non-aggression pact between Germany and the Soviet Union has been in existence for 13 years, signed in 1926 by Foreign Minister Gustav Stresemann and Soviet Ambassador Nikolai Krestinsky. This pact is still formally in force. Why was it necessary to have another, quote, non-aggression pact, end quote, at this particular time? In order to deliver a demonstrative blow a demonstrative blow against Poland, in order to explode as publicly, as sensationally, as thoroughly as possible any Polish hope that a Hitlerite invasion would encounter not only the Polish army, but the joint armed resistance of England and France on the one side and the Soviet Union on the other. Section 2. 12th of September 1939. Publicly, the Stalinist patriots from Moscow to New York and back again have shouted for a united military front of England, France, and the Soviet Union against Germany and the Axis. Not with Germany, we repeat, but against Germany. Against Germany. They insisted that it was more than ever urgent following the tragic Czechoslovakian experience in order to save Poland. Now, we Trotskyists, like revolutionary socialists everywhere, never agreed with the chauvinistic campaign of the Stalinists for the, quote, defense of poor little Poland, end quote. Their agitation meant, in reality, the commission of two crimes: the recruiting of cannon fodder for one gang of imperialist bandits, the slave-holding, quote, democracies, end quote, of England and France, as against another, and the meek submission of the Polish workers, peasants, and national minorities to the rule of the reactionary Polish autocracy. The primary and principal task of the Polish masses was and remains the overturn of the clique of generals and colonels who rule the land, who club down the workers, squeeze the peasants to the bone, keep the Ukrainian and national minorities in an inferno of persecution and discrimination, and practice a vicious anti-Semitism which is second only to Hitler's. Yet, while we did not join in the Stalinist cattle herding for war, we were not and are not indifferent to the fate of the Polish people or even of the Polish nation. And we mean the Polish nation, not the Polish Empire, in which the old and upstart Polish aristocracy rules by military force over millions of people of other nationalities. The hope for aid which the Polish masses threatened by Nazi subjugation could rightfully and not vainly place in a revolutionary workers' government, if that existed in Russia today, was betrayed by the perfidious Bonapartist gang in the Kremlin when it capitulated to Hitler. Stalin capitulated to Hitler? Exactly. And that brings us to the question of why. Why Stalin felt obliged to sign the shameful pact. The Stalin regime enjoys only the bitter hatred of the Soviet masses. Its basis continues to narrow every day, and the capitalist world, largely thanks to Stalinism's criminal policies, is far more sure of itself as it faces the working class in 1939 than it was in 1919. Scratch beneath the surface of the optimistic fairy tales told in the Stalinist press, and you find that, under Stalin's rule, the Soviet Union is in an advanced state of degeneration. Stalin's clique is at once the product and the producer of this degeneration. Now we're in a position to deal with the question: which of the two partners in the Stalin-Nazi pact was the stronger? Which is in the better position to gain from the pact? It is a bitter truth for us to observe, but we must not refuse to see that in the past 6 years Hitler has not only consolidated but has vastly expanded his power. Hitler took power in Germany without meeting with the slightest resistance from the Social Democrats or the Stalinists. 1933 marked Stalin's first capitulation to Hitler. 1933 marked Stalin's first capitulation to Hitler. He denounced the Versailles Treaty limitations on German armaments in 1935, and nobody stopped him. This is referring to Hitler. Hitler reintroduced conscription without opposition. Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, and nobody stopped him. He won the Saar territory in a plebiscite. Hitler succeeded in smashing to bits the whole labor and revolutionary movement. In March 1938, he annexed Austria without firing a shot. 6 months later, Czechoslovakia was raked in. Another 6 months passed, and he took Memel without a fight. He won his fight in Spain. By the time this appears, he may have Danzig, Gdansk, and the corridor, if not all of Poland. The remilitarization of the Rhineland, according to Wikipedia, the remilitarization of the Rhineland began on the 7th of March 1936 when military forces of the German Reich entered the Rhineland, which directly contravened the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno Treaties. Neither France nor Britain was prepared for a military response, so they did not act. After 1939, commentators have said that a strong military move in 1936 might have ruined the expansionist plans of Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Germany. However, recent historiography agrees that both public and elite opinion in Britain and France strongly opposed a military intervention, and neither had an army prepared to move in. After the end of World War I, the Rhineland came under Allied occupation. Under the 1919 Treaty of Versailles, the German military was forbidden from all territories west of the Rhine or within 50 kilometers east of it. The 1925 Locarno Treaties reaffirmed the then permanently demilitarized status of the Rhineland. In 1929, German Foreign Minister Gustav Stresemann negotiated the withdrawal of the Allied forces. The last soldiers left the Rhineland in June 1930. After the Nazi regime took power in January 1933, Germany began working towards rearmament and the remilitarization of the Rhineland. On the 7th of March 1936, using the Franco-Soviet Treaty of Mutual Assistance as a pretext, Hitler ordered the Wehrmacht to march 20,000 German troops into the Rhineland, which caused joyous celebrations across Germany. The French and the British governments, unwilling to risk war, decided against enforcing the treaties. The remilitarization and the German rearmament changed the balance of power in Europe from France and its allies toward Germany by allowing Germany to pursue a policy of aggression in Western Europe that had been blocked by the demilitarized status of the Rhineland. The fact that Britain and France did not intervene made Hitler believe that neither country would get in the way of Nazi foreign policy. That made him decide to quicken the pace of German preparations for war and the domination of Europe. On the 14th of March 1936, during a speech in Munich, Hitler stated, quote, "Neither threats nor warnings will prevent me from going my way. I follow the path assigned to me by Providence with the instinctive sureness of a sleepwalker," end quote. Hitler. Back to the text. Against the indubitable strengthening of the Nazi regime, Stalin has only defeats to record. He lost the German and Czechoslovakian communist parties, each with hundreds of thousands of members, in 2 Hitlerite blows. The Polish Communist Party he himself suppressed while he wooed the Spanish colonels. Ethiopia, despite Litvinov's tearful pleas to the League of Nations, fell to Mussolini, whose airplanes flew with Russian oil and whose soldiers fed on Russian wheat. His whole policy in Spain cracked up. Czechoslovakia, ditto. His policy in the Orient lost him the Chinese Eastern Railway, and his ending with, quote, ally, end quote, Chiang Kai-shek, driven further and further into the interior. I want to check out the Chinese Eastern Railway because it's mentioned a lot, and I don't really know what its historical importance is. The Chinese Eastern Railway is the historical name for a railway system in northeast China known as Manchuria. The Russian Empire constructed the line from 1897 to 1902 during the Great Game period. The railway was a concession to Russia and later the Soviet Union, granted by the Qing dynasty government of Imperial China. The system linked Chita and Vladivostok in the Russian Far East and with Port Arthur, then an Imperial Russian leased ice-free port. The T-shaped line consisted of 3 branches, the western branch now the Harbin-Manzhouli Railway, the eastern branch now the Harbin-Swifenhe Railway, the southern branch now part of the Beijing-Harbin Railway, which intersected in Harbin. St. Petersburg administered the railway in the concession known as the Chinese Eastern Railway Zone from the city of Harbin, which grew into a major rail hub. The southern branch of the CER, known as the Japanese South Manchuria Railway from 1906, became a locus and partial casus belli for the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905, the 1929 Sino-Soviet conflict, and the Second Sino-Japanese War of 1937 to 1945. The Soviet Union sold the railway to the Japanese puppet state of Manchukuo in 1935. Later in 1945, the Soviets regained co-ownership of the railway by treaty. The Soviet Union returned the Chinese Eastern Railway to the People's Republic of China in 1952. So, back to the text. Stalin's Popular Front in France breathed its last breath when it produced Daladier and Bonnet, voted into office by the Communist Party. So, Edouard Daladier lived from 1884 to 1970 and was a French radical socialist center-left politician and the Prime Minister of France who signed the Munich Agreement before the outbreak of World War II. Daladier was born in Carpentras and began his political career before World War I. During the war, Edouard Daladier fought on the Eastern Front and was decorated for his service. After the war, Daladier became a leading figure in the Radical Party and Prime Minister in 1933 and 1934. Daladier was Minister of Defense from 1936 to 1940 and Prime Minister again in 1938. As head of government, he expanded the French welfare state in 1939. Along with Neville Chamberlain, Benito Mussolini, and Adolf Hitler, Daladier signed the Munich Agreement in 1938, which gave Nazi Germany control over the Sudetenland. After Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. During the Phony War, France's failure to aid Finland against the Soviet Union's invasion during the Winter War led to Daladier's resignation. On the 21st of March 1940, in his replacement by Paul Reynaud, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Daladier remained Minister of Defense until 19th of May, when Reynaud took over the portfolio personally after the French defeat at Sedan. After the fall of France, Daladier was tried for treason by the Vichy government during the Riom trial and imprisoned first in Fort du Portelet and then in Buchenwald concentration camp and finally in Itter Castle. After the Battle of Castle Itter, Daladier resumed his political career as a member of the French Chamber of Deputies from 1946 to 1958. Edouard Daladier died in Paris in 1970. And also, Georges Bonnet lived from 1889 to 1973 and was a French politician who served as foreign minister in 1938 and 1939 and was a leading figure in the Radical Party. Back to the text. All of Stalin's foreign policies have proved bankrupt. All Stalin's foreign enterprises have suffered shipwreck. At home, excuse me, COVID. At home, his position is no better. The last 6 years in particular have seen Stalin's rule in a state of almost uninterrupted crisis, each convulsion more violent than the one before it. The overwhelming majority of the people, the simple people, the small people, the toiling people, hate Stalin as bitterly as Tsar Nicholas the Bloody was hated, and with just as good reason. How else explain the continual purges, the imprisonments, the exilings, the executions, the endless mass terror? What truly popular government has ever had to resort to anything like it outside a period of civil war? And that's exactly what Stalin is engaged in, a civil war of the bureaucratic caste against the masses of the people. Stalin has wiped out the old guard of the Russian Revolution, except Trotsky, who has been sought by more than one GPU assassin's bullet. The prisons, the godforsaken corners of exile, the vast concentration camps are chock full of Stalin's victims. There are more political prisoners in some provinces of the country today than there were in the whole empire under the Tsar. All the liberties won by the laborer's blood and rifle in the revolution had been abolished by the bureaucracy. The worker is tied to his job and cannot shift to another job or another city without being granted permission, duly recorded in the internal passport he is compelled to carry. The disparity between the wages of the low-paid worker and the salaries of the upper crust is stupendous and on the rise. So is the disparity between the income and conditions of the poor peasants and the bosses of the, quote, collective farms. Science, art, and culture are prostituted to the power interests of the narrow-minded gang in power. Conditions in the non-Russian national republics, Ukrainian, Georgian, White Russian, Uzbekistan, etc., are a replica of the relations that existed between the Tsarist Imperial Russians in Moscow and the national minorities of the periphery of the regime. The secret police, GPU, and army machine keep Stalin in power with the aid of jail keys, pistols, and bayonets. Stalin's rules can only be ruled by means of terror. As the country moves closer to the monstrosity which he misnames, quote, socialism, end quote, the purges and the terror increase in intensity. Everywhere about him, Stalin sees plots and conspiracies, real and alleged, against his domination. The reign of terror, during which millions, literally millions, have either been deported, imprisoned, or murdered, is Stalin's own confession to immense unpopularity. The rule by terror means that Stalin and the bureaucracy he personifies are themselves terrified. What do they fear? War. The fear of war, in this case as in many others, is the fear of mobilization. The fear of mobilization is the fear of arming the masses of people. The fear of arming the masses is the fear of revolution. The fear of arming the masses is the fear of revolution. If you don't know, I repeat things that are in italics. The reasons behind the Stalin-Nazi pact cannot be fully understood, however, unless the reader grasps the fundamental standpoint of the Kremlin regime and grasps further the fact that it is in irreconcilable opposition to the fundamental standpoint of the original Lenin-Trotsky regime, which Stalin and co. finally succeeded in overthrowing in the course of a running fight that began as early as 1923. Lenin, Trotsky, and the real Bolshevik Party led the masses to victory in 1917 on the basis of the proposition that the Russian Revolution was only one part of an international working class revolution. The Bolshevik leaders repeat 1,000 times to the Russian and the world masses that Red Russia could not establish socialism by itself, with its own forces, and unaided by the triumphant workers of other, more advanced countries. This was not only in conformity with Marxian theory, but with modern world realities. Russia might hold out for a time, even lay the foundations of socialism, but it could not keep going for a long period of time without help from revolutionary states in other lands. As for achieving a classless socialist society, with security and plenty for all, that was out of the question entirely if revolutionary Russia remained isolated in a capitalist world. In 1924, however, when the European revolutionary wave subsided for a while, Stalin coined the theory of, quote, socialism in a single country, end quote. Russia, he argued, could establish socialism by itself, provided only there was no armed intervention from abroad. Now this theory, while totally unsuited to the interests of the Russian and international revolutions, was ideally suited to the interests of the growing Soviet bureaucracy. The officials, corrupted oldsters and upstart youngsters, had lost all faith in the power of the world working class to free itself from capitalist misrule, at least not for another 100 years. Meanwhile, they argued, let's hold on to what we have in Russia. That sounded plausible to many people, especially those who had grown weary and discouraged and didn't see that new and stormier waves of revolution would break throughout the world in the years to come. Only the officials really meant, let's hold on to what we have in Russia and to what we can get. As for the rest of the world, the task of the working class is confined primarily, later it became exclusively, to preventing foreign intervention. In other words, instead of concentrating on getting rid of their own capitalist despots at home, the workers in other countries were to be limited to acting as border patrols for the Soviet bureaucracy. Leaving aside for the moment the theoretical aspects of the question, the practical results of this policy were disastrous both for the official Communist International and that section of the labor movement that followed it, and for the Soviet Union itself. All that a labor skate or capitalist political shyster had to do to get the unqualified support of the communist movement for some shady enterprise or downright sellout was to take a cheap oath in favor of, quote, defending, end quote, the Soviet Union. As Stalinism went from bad to worse, and the Kremlin went in for super clever diplomatic tie-ups with imperialist powers, the official Communist International, from which every critical, honest revolutionist was expelled, was changed from a militant fighter against world capitalism into an anti-revolutionary instrument, a cheap pawn in the hands of Stalin's Foreign Office. Section 3, 19th of September 1939. In Lenin's time, the Soviet government made more than one diplomatic or commercial agreement with capitalist countries. That was unavoidable then, and remains unavoidable as long as a workers' government is surrounded by a hostile world. But if Lenin made a diplomatic agreement with Germany or France, he had not compelled the revolutionary movement in those countries to stop fighting its own capitalist class and government. Stalin changed all that. While Stalin was seeking an alliance with England, France, and the United States, especially in the past 4 years, the communist parties in those countries tried with might and main to make an alliance with the home capitalist government and urged the labor movement as a whole to follow suit. Where the communist parties had once been the champions of labor independence and militancy, Stalin converted them into the champions of labor's subordination and docility to capitalism. In practice, therefore, especially in recent years, quote, socialism in one country, end quote, meant that Stalin traded off Communist Party support to any government, no matter how reactionary, no matter how many millions of colonial slaves it oppressed, so long as it promised to be a, quote, ally, end quote, in protecting the Soviet bureaucracy. In practice also, Stalin's Russian nationalism meant putting the fate of the Russian Revolution into the hands of cynical imperialist diplomats who pretended for a moment to be friendly, instead of where it belongs, in the hands of the Russian and international working class. In practice, this working class was confused, demoralized, and driven under the yoke of its enemies. Thus, the interests of the ruling bureaucracy in Russia have come into ever sharper and finally irreconcilable conflict with the interests of the Russian masses, of the Soviet Union itself, and of the international working class. Stalin fears war, but Stalin fears especially such a war as the Soviet Union and its bureaucracy are involved in, for that would in all likelihood spell his doom. It would, however, be wrong to jump to the conclusion that Stalin is a real prop of peace. The same reasons that dictate Stalin's yearnings for peace in Russia dictate a policy of warmongering in all the other important countries of the world. The same reasons that dictate Stalin's yearnings for peace in Russia dictate a policy of warmongering in all the other important countries of the world. The Soviet Union is immediately and directly threatened on two sides, by Japan on the east and by Germany on the west. The principal Soviet enemy is Hitler. It has therefore been Stalin's policy at bottom, since the Nazis came to power in 1933, to, quote, appease, end quote, Hitler, to come to terms with Hitler, to make an alliance with Hitler. Russia would then be in a position to deal comparatively easily with Japan in the East. If this basic point is borne in mind, much that was obscure in Stalinist policy becomes clear. It will be easier, for example, to understand why the Stalinist press in France, instead of solidarizing itself with a despairing young Jew, Herschel Greenspan, who sought to protest Hitlerite anti-Semitism by shooting von Rath, denounced him as a Nazi or a Trotskyist spy. So, Ernst von Rath lived from 1909 to 1938 and was a member of the German nobility, a Nazi Party member, and German Foreign Office diplomat. Ernst von Rath is mainly remembered for his assassination in Paris in 1938 by a Polish-Jewish teenager, Herschel Greenspan, which provided a pretext for Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Historians consider Kristallnacht the beginning of the Holocaust. And Herschel Greenspan lived from 1921, last rumored to be alive, 1945, declared dead, 1960, was a Polish-Jewish expatriate born and raised in Weimar, Germany, who shot and killed the German diplomat Ernst von Rath on the 7th of November 1938 in Paris. The Nazis used this assassination as a pretext to launch Kristallnacht, the anti-Semitic pogrom of 9th-10th of November 1938. Greenspan was seized by the Gestapo after the fall of France and brought to Germany. His further fate remains unknown. It is generally assumed that Greenspan did not survive World War II, and he was declared dead in absentia by the West German government in 1960. Herschel Greenspan, this was done at the request of Herschel Greenspan's parents, who said they had not heard anything from him in over 15 years, which was out of character for him. However, this remains a matter of dispute. Kurt Grossman claimed in 1957 that Greenspan lived in Paris under another identity. A photograph of a man resembling Greenspan was cited in 2016 as evidence to support the claim that he was still alive in Bamberg, Germany, on the 3rd of July, 1946. So that's who the Soviets declared as a Nazi or Trotskyist spy. Under the shameful silence from Soviet officialdom on the occasion of Hitler's barbarous pogroms against the Jews, to understand why Jewish refugees could find no haven in the Soviet Union, to understand what Walter Duranty meant when he cabled the New York Times after all Stalin has killed off as many Jews as Hitler did, to understand why Litvinov was purged. How could a sensitive, quote, Aryan, end quote, like von Ribbentrop shake hands with a Jewish foreign commissar? The concentration on making a deal with Hitler has frequently been interrupted, so to say, for two reasons. One, by the hope of making an alliance with the, quote, democracies, end quote, to squeeze Hitler into a corner and prevent Hitler from assaulting Russia, and two, by the hope that the negotiations with the, quote, democracies, end quote, would frighten Hitler into speeding up an agreement with Stalin. The first hope, illusory and utopian from the beginning, was completely shattered at Munich. One second, actually. The first hope, illusory and utopian from the beginning, was completely shattered at Munich. The, quote, democratic, end quote, imperialists showed that they would rather give Hitler free rein in his drive to the east, that is, against Russia, than they would make an alliance with Russia to smash Hitler and Mussolini, especially when they reflected that after fascism cracked up in Germany and Italy, revolutions would break out and spread rapidly to France, England, and God knows where else. Stalin therefore had to come to terms with Hitler, and Hitler chose the moment for springing the announcement of the pact, which would give him the best position in starting his next conquest, Poland. But though he capitulated to Hitler, it does not follow that Stalin would object violently to having another world war explode, with the, quote, democracies, end quote, fighting the, quote, fascist aggressors, end quote, and the Soviets staying out of the war as long as possible. Quite the contrary, Stalin continues to drive in just that direction. Although he has made his peace with Hitler for a short time, as we shall see later on, Hitler continues to instigate a war in which he will not participate. While he is a, quote, pacifist out of fear, end quote, at home, he is a warmonger abroad. Keep ourselves in the saddle, preserve ourselves by hook or crook, and everything else, the labor movement, the Communist International, the colonial peoples, the twaddle about, quote, democracy and, quote, peace can go hang. While the bureaucracy succeeded in keeping itself in the Soviet saddle. Will the bureaucracy succeed in keeping itself in the Soviet saddle? Not the slightest hesitation need be felt in replying categorically, no. The only point to be resolved is this. The abominable Stalinist clique will be crushed at a later stage by Hitlerism, in which case a new era of reaction will open up from which the world may not emerge for a long time, or it will be swept into the discard by a resurrected revolutionary movement of workers and peasants inside the Soviet Union. All our hopes and all our energies must be directed towards the latter solution of the mortal crisis the Russian Revolution is experiencing. I think this is more or less what Trotsky's prognosis is. I'm not exactly sure. Yeah. Will Hitler really attack the Soviet Union? Whoever examines the situation intelligently must reply, yes. The feeble Stalinist arguments that the, quote, pact has weakened the Axis, end quote, are so much nonsense, and dangerous nonsense at that. What Hitler gave away in the pact we have already seen. What did Hitler abandon? Hitler's designs upon Russia, especially on the granary of the Ukraine and the mineral riches of the Urals? Not for a moment. Hitler's idea of immediately attacking the Soviet Union, he didn't have to give up that idea for the simple reason that he did not contemplate such an attack at this time. His objective for the time being is more modest, the conquest of Poland, and Stalin gave him invaluable aid in achieving his goal. He did abandon Japan. Of that there is no doubt, and the Stalinist press presents this as a tremendous victory. Hitler abandoned Japan for the time being, and only for the time being, in exchange for a much solider ally. And he did abandon the so-called anti-Comintern pact. Small consolation, the, quote, fighting against the Communist International, end quote, was as much a fraud with Hitler as with the, quote, fight for democracy, end quote, was with Stalin. Hitler has known for years that Stalin himself liquidated the Communist International. Hitler has known for years that Stalin himself liquidated the Communist International. The Hitlerites know what Stalinism represents. They know where the real threat of working-class revolution comes from. It is not the discredited pawns of Stalinist diplomacy, the Communist International, that fascism fears. As the banner-bearer of the working-class revolution, of the revolution for socialism, it sees the, quote, Trotskyist, end quote, the Fourth International. And it is right, for the Fourth International is the mortal implacable foe of fascism, of imperialism in general, of capitalist oppression, and as their foe it shall triumph. That is why the Socialist Workers Party summons every militant worker who is conscious of his class interest, who is imbued with the real spirit of internationalism, to rally to its great banner, and to fight in the great cause. Our call is addressed in particular to the rank and file of the Communist Party and the Young Communist League and their sympathizers. The Soviet Union is not relieved of the threat of attack. That threat is aggravated. Hitler has had a non-aggression pact with Poland not so long ago. Stalin's policy facilitates the coming attack upon Russia because, by giving Hitler a free hand through Poland, he grants him a highly important strategical base of operations against the Soviet Union. Tomorrow, the next day, Hitler will seek to repay Stalin for the pact in ever more ringing coin than he is repaying Poland. Every worker, every communist worker, must understand that. Every worker must also clearly aware now of the monstrous crime that was perpetuated by Stalin in a series of, quote, trials and purges. How many thousands of revolutionists did Stalin send to their deaths in the last few years on the charge of being, quote, Trotskyist agents of Hitler, end quote? We call the trials frame-ups, and now, by signing the pact with Hitler, Stalin draws the black pencil of emphasis under our charge. While he was framing up and assassinating all opponents, all critics, past, present, or potential, with the accusation of, quote, Hitlerite agents, end quote, he is busily engaging in becoming the principal agent of Hitler. The principal agent of Hitler. The Moscow trials, the horrible purges, the nightmare of terror, these were all parts of the preparations for an alliance with Adolf Hitler and his bandits. Together with Ribbentrop, Molotov, and Stalin signed the death warrant of the communist parties. Stalin long ago drained the revolutionary blood out of them. Now Stalin is smashing them bodily. Their organizational disintegration is taking place at a terrific rate before our very eyes. Where will these sincere and devoted workers go who are now abandoning the communist parties by the thousands in England, France, and the United States? We know where the bureaucrats will go. They will remain the paid lackeys and scribblers of the Kremlin despot, or they will become full-fledged servants of their own imperialist overlords. But the communist workers? Will they go over to capitalism? Will they become the dupes of the fantastic fraud known in capitalist society as, quote, democracy? Will they abandon the class struggle entirely and become docile serfs of the rulers of industry and finance, willing cannon fodder of the coming war? The Stalinist party is through. Nobody will mourn in its burial. Nobody will try to defend the Stalin-Nazi pact in a serious trade union, in a Jewish organization, or for that matter, wherever intelligent workers are assembled. What then? We say there is a need, greater than ever today, to struggle against reaction, against the capitalist offensive, for socialism and freedom, for peace and plenty. There is a road to struggle, too. That road was broadly marked out by the great teachers of the working class movement, Marx and Lenin. That road the workers must take if they are to survive as human beings, if they are to rise to the new heights of human dignity. That road is the revolutionary struggle for socialism. All the professional, quote, Democrats, and the, quote, Social Democrats, and the, quote, liberal intellectuals, end quote, whom they yesterday approved the Moscow frame-ups or covered them up and who presented Stalin as a noble, worthy ally of the great democracies, are turning tail now and scurrying off like rats. Now they no longer declare that, quote, Soviet democracy and bourgeois democracy are practically the same thing and make natural allies. Now they expound the new wisdom that, quote, communism and, quote, fascism are the same thing and make natural allies. Their conclusion, their road, on to new war to make the world safe for democracy. On to the trenches. Long live the divine goal of modern humanity. Excuse me. Long live the divine goal of modern humanity, the battlefield graveyard. Our road was never theirs. Our road leads to the great socialist society. Our methods are the methods of militant and uncompromising class struggle against all exploitation and iniquity. Stalin has succeeded only in discrediting Stalinism. The banner of revolutionary struggle, of the Fourth International, continues to fly without a shameful spot on it, onto the victory of socialism and freedom. That's the end of the piece itself, and there's an editor's note here. I'm assuming this is from Matt Gomna. Editor's note. The Socialist Workers Party Political Committee minutes of September 3, 1939 record, quote, reading by canon of two quotations from the article by Shachtman in the September 4th issue of The Appeal, which is article designed for publication as a pamphlet. Quotations as follows, quote, in exchange for a Hitlerite promise not to attack the Soviet Union, Stalin has given Hitler a free hand in Poland. Poland has been ruthlessly sacrificed to the brutal imperialistic ambitions of Nazi Germany in the hope of saving the hides of the Kremlin autocrats, end quote. Quote, why was it necessary to have another, quote, non-aggression pact, end quote, at this particular time? In order to deliver a demonstrative blow against Poland, in order to explode, as publicly, as sensationally, as thoroughly as possible, any Polish hope that a Hitlerite invasion would encounter not only the Polish army, but the joint armed resistance of England and France on the one side, and the Soviet Union on the other, end quote. Motion by Cannon, that the printing of the pamphlet be held up until the material as a whole can be studied and approved by a subcommittee of the PC, of the political committee, of which Comrade Shachtman will be a member, carried, Carter abstaining, end quote. The end. Thank you for listening.